Hey, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are on this planet of ours. I'm going to give it one more second. I'm going to have another sip of my drink. The kids are in martial arts class, and I'm out here with my big data t-shirt. It's a little dated, um, so because it's got the Hadoop elephant on it. I always show off my data geek cred. But one of the interesting things that came across my desk this week was a YouTube video of a commercial. I don't know if it was really a commercial because it was like 5 minutes long, from 1992, showing off Microsoft Excel. Microsoft Excel is one of Microsoft's kind of, I think, core pillar applications. It basically runs the world. It is probably the most widely used ERP, CRM, XRM system in the world. Much to the chagrin of folks at Microsoft who are trying to get people to do that sort of work in Dynamics. But ultimately, Excel basically runs the world. Now, there are other competing products, Google Sheets, LibreOffice has it, an alternative. Hey, I see I have a chat already. Oh, that's okay, man. It's Rupesh. Thanks for stopping in. Yes, it is an important topic. No worries, man. You can always watch the replay. In fact, I'm going to learn this trick from, if you're watching this live, put in hashtag live. If you watch this on the replay, just put in hashtag replay. That way helps me understand kind of the metrics a little better. So you're probably thinking like, Frank, I clicked on this video, this notification, and you said you were talking about the long tail of GUI applications. And here you are talking about Excel. There's a point to this. And the point is that this commercial, and you can either use your search engine of choice. I'm no longer employed by Microsoft, so I can say Google, or Bingle, which is a common phrase inside the firewall, was a do a search for Microsoft Excel commercial 1992, or just go to Frank's World. It's one of the 5 or 6 most recent posts. And what's fascinating is it's basically the setup is that these two guys are on an elevator on the way up to the executive floor, and they're trying to work on a presentation because the numbers changed. I forget. But the setup is that one guy is like, oh my God, we're not going to make it, right? We're not going to be able to make the changes in time. And the other guy is like, no, don't worry about it. I got Excel, right? And he's going through and basically editing the numbers, formatting the spreadsheet, doing all the things that we take for granted today, right? We take for granted to be able to just, select with a mouse and format, the table from like pre-designed formats. We take for granted the ability to just use your mouse, click on the column and say, this column is money, right? We take for granted all of these things. And, so basically our heroes in the story, they're on this very early 90s kind of laptop. The screen is like, probably about a little larger than, a little smaller than about the size of an iPad mini, say. And the rest of the laptop is pretty bulky. And this guy is like holding it and kind of entering the numbers in the elevator. And as they kind of go through, other guys in the elevator are like, hey, wait a minute, my spreadsheet doesn't do that. My spreadsheet doesn't do that. And I'm sure kids watching that today are probably wondering, how could you have a spreadsheet that didn't do this? And if you go back, oh yeah, by the way, hi man. Everyone should check out what Rupesh is doing. Rupesh is doing some amazing stuff with his startups. I think he's got more than one. But it's cool how they all kind of work with each other. Anyway, so hey, thanks for joining. Yeah, the commercial is funny. Like, thanks, Dilip. The commercial is funny, right? Because you're like, I'm sure there's a lot of kids that watched it, or anyone that doesn't remember Lotus 123, and that's basically who the commercial was knocking. My first spreadsheet experience, my first PC experience, and I had a Commodore 64 as a kid, and I don't remember if I had a spreadsheet program. I remember having a word processing program. It wasn't WordStar. I forget what it was, but in any case, my mom had to bring home from work. She had to do some work, and she brought home a compact luggable. And this thing would have been, the keyboard was like the top of it, but the thing was like 20, 30 pounds or something like that. And she brought it home, and like there was a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet program was Lotus 123. You probably have heard of. And basically, it was a DOS-based program, which means that it was all command line. Back before the command line was cool, it was the only way to go. And basically, that would have been maybe 1989, 1990. So Windows, I think, was at version 3. Windows 3.1 was really the one that kind of just exploded. So GUI was not really a thing outside of the Macintosh world. And ultimately, this guy in the commercial, I remember being fascinated by Excel. I mean, Lotus. See, look how far we've come. And basically, it had a DOS-based thing, and you went through and you would, put your numbers and you would type in your formulas and things like that. And what was interesting, I think the formatting was it slash, and then you would go through the commands, but you couldn't format it. You could not format it. And then they added something, and I forget what the name of it was, but you had to basically invoke, and that was Lotus's keyword for basically shelling out to another program. And I forget what it was, but then you could do the formatting with the fonts and stuff like that. You could not change the font size. It was basically, it was very much command line, right? It was nothing fancy. Although at the time, it was kind of state of the art. So along comes Microsoft, and they realized that with their presence on Windows, which is a graphical user interface for basically, regular IBM compatible PCs, they came in and they basically kind of wrote it in a way that was a graphical user interface. And all those things you had to do the formatting, like just think about if you center in a line, I think was the big one, because I remember having to do that. I remember I did a school report with that luggable, and I remember it taking like 20, 30, it took longer than it should to do a center on a line on something, right? So the long and short of it is that we have been so accustomed to a GUI spreadsheet for so long, it's hard. I mean, even I have to like think about because as they're going through the elevator and they basically pitch to this executive lady on the top floor and kind of show off the formatted spreadsheet and that, and they do it all in the elevator on the laptop, and you're seeing kind of you look at that and it's like, those are just table stakes today. If I wanted to come out with a spreadsheet program like Google Sheets, it has to do those things. And if I want to come up with, instead of Google Sheets, Frankie Sheets, right? Then I would have to have that, right? I mean, that's just table stakes. So it's just interesting to see how, that would have been 30 years ago, how much computing has evolved, but how little has changed. I mean, you see that the interface in Excel has changed slightly, but I mean, you could probably fire up an Excel, I don't know what version it was, but Excel from the 1992 era, and you'd probably be able to use it. In fact, it would probably be more or less the same, the print, the basics and stuff. Obviously, the 3D mapping and stuff like that is and spark lines is all kind of new, but it's interesting how you have kind of that long tail there, and how that really transformed productivity for information workers or office workers and things like that. And it's just amazing because you watch that and you realize how far we've come and how revolutionary Excel was at the time. At the time, like I said, the dominant spreadsheet program was something called Lotus 123. And it did a lot of things. Trust me, it was very powerful for its time. But if you wanted to do the fancy formatting, you wanted to do the color changes. I don't remember if it even supported color. If you wanted to do all those things, you had to go through a lot of hoops. You had to invoke a program. I forget what it was called. Anyone that remembers that, but I remember like invoke was the command. and I'm still trying to figure out. Um, it's going to bother me. It's been one of those things. But you basically had to go through, and then it launched like, I think from terminal mode to like graphics mode, and then you would like, you know, design stuff, and it was not easy. It was not intuitive at all. You kind of had to watch somebody do it and then kind of learn it. And again, way before YouTube. Might have been before the YouTube founders were even born at that point. So it's just interesting how the long tail of that is and how consistent the UI has been over the years. Excel is probably one of the, in addition to being the most powerful, widespread and influential programs on the planet, is probably also um, one of the software engineering marvels of the world, because I mean, you could probably, I've never tried this, but you could probably load up, a file from that era and into an existing, Excel, 2016 or whatever, and work on it. And all the features of an Excel, I mean, Excel, when I was taking my data science certification classes, I discovered that there were parts of Excel that existed I did not know. Like, it's just amazing how rich and deep it is. I would say Photoshop being the other, because Photoshop can do images for print publications, for web applications, for video. And I mean, the code bases for these must be, I mean, just either absolute messes or absolute works of art, and probably a little bit of both, I guess. But it's just amazing how much that is, and how influential I think Office was in making Windows dominant in enterprises, because you had Word at one point, there was a DOS version, and then there was Word for Windows, and then there was Word for Mac. And it was always interesting. I had a Mac back in the day. I was a big Mac fanatic when I was in college. I went from, well, we only had the Commodore 64. I only had the Commodore 64, and all the other computers were very pricey. Commodore 64 was kind of like, the computer, the PC for the home computer for the proletariat. It was only about $300-400, and then maybe another like $200 for the hard drive, not the hard drive, for the external floppy drive. Compared to, it was a minimum $2,000 to get like an IBM compatible PC, and or an Amiga. Amiga was always my dream machine. But long story short, and at this point, 12-13 minutes into the stream, I think we're past that point. But it was an interesting commercial, because if you were watching that and you're of a certain age, you're probably like, why is this a big deal, right? I don't know how many people update their spreadsheets on the elevator ride up, but to their big important meeting with some executive. But I just can't imagine doing that in Lotus, and I think that was kind of the point, even though it was a bit of a contrived scenario. And I also would imagine that there are some people, hey, Charles, how's it going? I am with Red Hat now, and I'm loving it. It's interesting, the open source world. I mean, we may never see the source code for Excel or even Photoshop, but in the open source world, kind of the windows are open to it all, which is interesting. It's a different philosophy, and I think Linux really has. I mean, when this commercial came out, I think Linux officially started in 1991. Unix obviously goes back to the dawn of time, to the dawn of the epoch at least, right? 1970, January 1st, 1970. But thanks for stopping in, Charles. Yep, I'm at Red Hat, and I will have a lot of good things to say soon. Actually, what's cool is if just do a YouTube search for some of the keynote sessions from the Red Hat Summit that took place in Boston earlier this week, and it was interesting. It was kind of like, it really crystallized kind of the thoughts I've had, my kind of slow conversion from being kind of maybe skeptical of open source to um, apathetic towards it to now being a full-on advocate for it. Um, you know, I am definitely a convert to it. And if you look at the data science tools, the data science tools are, I mean, they're all open source anyway, right? So like a lot of folks, you know, given my background with Silverlight and WPF and Windows phone apps and Windows, a lot of folks were surprised when I joined Red Hat, but you know, only Nixon could go to China, as the old Vulcan proverb says. But what's interesting is how open source has not only eaten the world, but I mean, it's the default mode for enterprise software. You know, you're going to see, you know, a lot of enterprises do not want to get locked into a proprietary system, whether that's, you know, Microsoft, Oracle, or you know, any of those kind of closed source systems. It's interesting how open source is the default now, which I remember when Linux was starting to really get traction. You know, there was a company, an insurance company, I think it was. It was a big financial institution down, pretty far down Broadway on Wall Street. It's back when we would go into the office, which is also another funny thing about the video, right? Like you have like 5, 6 people jammed to an elevator, or is there more? And like nobody batted an eye, nobody had a mask on. I would imagine that somebody watching that commercial who's a kid today, 20 years from now, will be like, oh my God, they're not wearing masks and nobody's freaking out. Um, the company I had mentioned, so I was talking to a guy who was my manager at another startup I was at, and then he went to like a big insurance firm. I think his name was Steve, and he was like, I'm like, well, what's the deal with Linux? Like, you could port kind of what you're working on, you know, because I think they wanted to experiment with Tomcat or Apache. That's what it was. It was like, well, why have you tried Apache and kind of doing this in there? And he's like, oh no, like they will not touch open source software, because there was a lot of concern over you know, copyright, and they were like, we won't touch anything that's remotely open source unless we're held harmless. Like it was a whole like laundry list of things. And now to see how it's gone a complete 180, and now it's kind of the default. Like even Microsoft has embraced Linux to varying degrees. So it's interesting how, and open source in general. Like if you look, like Scott Hanselman, who I don't know what his exact role is, but he's effectively an evangelist. He's been on a tear of getting like old programs that are no longer supported or whatever, open sourced. So, you know, there used to be a program called Windows Live Writer, which was what one point was my blogging tool of choice. He got that open source. Now it's Open Live Writer. And there was another thing that he recently managed to convince people to get open sourced, Windows 3D Movie Maker, I think. And it's just a fascinating how this has evolved. And it's fascinating how GUIs have also evolved too, right? If you, like I said before, if you plop somebody down in front of Excel from 1992, don't even know what the version number was, honestly, they would probably be able to use it, right? And there would also be, you know, Linux didn't always have a GUI. It started off very much as a command line kind of tool, and it's really evolved. I mean, if you run Linux Mint, I mean, it's not really an adjustment from coming from Windows. And it's interesting how all these fundamentals of GUIs have kind of evolved over time. And, you know, whether you're on the Mac or whether you're on Windows or whether you're on Linux, you know, all the GUIs have kind of this familiar feel to it. It's a bit like a car, right? Like everything from like a Hyundai to a Porsche is going to have more or less the same type of controls, because it's more or less the same type of problem. But you could probably figure it out. And then every car in between too, right? I'm looking around this parking lot. There's a bunch of Toyotas, a Lexus. I saw a Tesla go by a minute ago. There's an Escalade. There's a Chevy. I mean, most people could probably just sit down and drive any one of those cars, assuming they could drive any one of them. You know what I mean? It's fascinating to see how that kind of evolved. Smartphones too, right? Obviously, people have their preferences, but you know, there's like it's interesting how that's changed. And I wonder what somebody from 1992 would see if somebody could like just roll up their iPad and be able to like do the same type of formatting work from like something as tiny as an iPad. Um, I think it would probably blow their minds. So with that, I'm going to end this stream. I want to thank you all for joining, and thanks for commenting live. Thanks, Dilip. Thanks, Rupesh. Thanks, thanks, Charles. And thanks for joining live. Thanks for watching live. And yeah, that's all I got. I hope you have a fantastic day. And let me know in the comments if there's something that you remember from the early days of computing that kids today just take for granted. Thanks, and have a fantastic day.